We can hire 3 junior engineers for your salary. Simon Blake, the new CTO, sneered across the conference table, his designer glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. Ethan Cole, 55, the man who'd built Nexra Properties' entire technological backbone over 18 years, stared back, his face unreadable. 2 weeks later, Simon's panicked voicemails flooded Ethan's phone as Ethan's system, began to crumble. Ethan didn't answer. He sat on his porch overlooking Lake Ontario, a glass of bourbon in hand, the sunset painting the water in hues of fire and gold. 18 years of code, of late nights, of building Nexra from a mom-and-pop outfit called Caldwell Estates into a real estate empire, reduced to a severance folder and a cold handshake. They thought he was a line item to cut, an overpaid relic. They didn't know about the hidden security layers, the intricate redundancies, the lines of code only he understood. Now, tenant portals were down, payments were failing, and thousands of residents were furious. Nexra was bleeding, and Simon was begging. Ethan wasn't gloating. He felt no thrill of revenge, only a quiet clarity. They were learning what he was worth. But something gnawed at him. The voicemails weren't just desperate. They hinted at secrets. A cryptic text from Mark Jensen, his old database admin, mentioned emails you need to see. What was Simon hiding? Who else had signed off on betraying Ethan? As the lake shimmered, Ethan sensed a deeper truth lurking beneath Nexra's collapse, one that could destroy more than just their systems. What do you do when the life you built turns against you, and the truth is darker than you ever imagined? Ethan Cole stood at the edge of his office, his salt and pepper hair catching the dim glow of the server room lights beyond the glass. At 55, he carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent decades building things that lasted. His sharp blue eyes, framed by faint crow's feet, scanned the blinking LEDs of the systems he'd designed, a silent symphony of code and circuits. He wore a pressed white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a pair of sensible khakis, unassuming, like the man himself. Ethan wasn't one for flash. He let his work speak. As chief systems architect at Nexra Properties, he'd turned a small real estate firm into a technological powerhouse, and every hum of those servers was a testament to his craft. 18 years ago, Ethan had walked into Caldwell Estates, a modest outfit with 4 apartment complexes, 2 creaky desktops, and a dial-up modem that groaned like an old dog. Edward Caldwell, the owner, had seen something in the young engineer from Syracuse. A hunger to build, not just to fix. "We're growing, Ethan," Edward had said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Make us something solid." Ethan did more than that. He crafted a property management system from scratch, tenant applications, maintenance requests, rent collection, all integrated into a seamless whole. Night after night, he'd sat at his desk, coffee going cold, writing code that wove resilience into every layer. When Caldwell Estates became Nexra Properties under a private equity firm, Ethan's system scaled with it, managing 63 properties across 4 states without a hiccup. He wasn't a talker, not like the MBAs who paraded through Nexra's boardroom with their buzzwords and PowerPoints. Ethan's pride was in the details, a redundancy that saved a payment system during a power outage, a security protocol that stopped a cyber attack cold. Colleagues called him the ghost in the machine, the man who kept Nexra's heart beating. He never chased promotions or raises. He trusted the company to see his value. Edward had once promising Ethan, "You're the backbone here." But Edward was gone, retired to Florida, and the new suits running Nexra saw only numbers. Ethan's salary, a growing expense on their spreadsheets. Ethan's home was a cedar-shingled cabin nestled against Lake Ontario, its wide porch offering a front-row seat to sunsets that turned the water to molten copper. Inside, the walls were lined with Clara's paintings, abstract swirls of blues and greens that captured the lake's restless spirit. Clara Cole, 52, was Ethan's anchor, a part-time artist with a sharp wit and a warm smile that could coax him out of his late-night coding spirals. Over dinner, her laughter filled the silences Ethan left, her stories of gallery rejections grounding him in a world beyond servers and code. They'd chosen not to have children, a decision made in their 30s to pour their energy into each other and their crafts. It wasn't sacrifice. It was clarity. A life built on quiet moments, like Clara's hand brushing his as they washed dishes. Ethan grew up in Rochester, the son of a car mechanic and a schoolteacher. His father, Jack, had calloused hands and a dreamer's heart, always tinkering in the garage, teaching Ethan that anything worth building was worth building right. Before Jack died of cancer a decade ago, he'd gripped Ethan's hand and said, "Make something that lasts, son, something they can't tear down." Ethan kept a faded photo of them on his desk. Jack in overalls, Ethan a gangly teen, both grinning beside a rebuilt engine. That promise drove him, a silent vow etched into every line of code he wrote for Nexera. But lately, Ethan felt the ground shifting. Nexera's new executives, with their quarterly targets and cloud solution buzzwords, dismissed his proposals for a documentation team as nice-to-haves. He'd watched colleagues, loyal engineers in their 50s, quietly escorted out, their desks cleared by security. Meetings grew tense, younger consultants rolling their eyes as Ethan explained his system's complexities. Clara saw it first. "They're phasing you out," she said one night, her voice soft but firm. "You need to protect yourself." Ethan brushed it off, clinging to the belief that his work was indispensable. Deep down, though, a fear gnawed at him. What if 18 years of loyalty meant nothing? What if Jack's dream was just a fragile thing, waiting to be crushed? The morning felt ordinary, the kind of Tuesday where Ethan Cole arrived at Nexera Properties with a thermos of black coffee and a mental checklist of server updates. His office smelled of old wood and electronics, a familiar comfort. At 8:45, Simon Blake, the new CTO, poked his head in, his designer glasses catching the light. "Quick meeting at 9, Simon said, his voice casual, almost rehearsed. Ethan nodded, assuming it was another routine check-in. He'd handled dozens of crises for Nexera. Why would this be different? The conference room was stark, its long table polished to a mirror sheen. Simon sat at the head, his navy suit crisp, his fingers drumming lightly on a manila folder. Laura Bennett from HR flanked him, her smile tight, her eyes fixed on a stack of papers. Ethan settled into a chair, the leather creaking under his weight. Simon didn't waste time. "Ethan, we value your contributions," he began, his tone clipped. "But Nexera needs to modernize. Your salary, it's enough for 3 junior engineers." The words landed like a punch, sharp and sudden. Laura slid the folder across the table. "A generous severance," she said softly. 2 months' pay, plus accrued vacation. Ethan's pulse quickened, but his face stayed still, a mask honed by years of debugging under pressure. He opened the folder, scanning the terms, the numbers blurring into meaningless shapes. Generous? 18 years reduced to this? He thought of the late nights, the systems he'd built from nothing. Simon leaned forward, expecting a fight. "Any questions?" Ethan met his gaze, his voice steady. "It's clear." Laura's brow furrowed, as if his calm unnerved her. But inside, Ethan was unraveling. Memories of Edward Caldwell's trust, of proposals ignored, of Simon's dismissive nods in recent months. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The closed-door meetings, the young consultants trailing Simon like shadows. He'd just refused to see them. Ethan walked out of the conference room, his steps measured, the severance folder tucked under his arm like a wound he refused to acknowledge. The hallway stretched endlessly, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, each hum a reminder of the systems he'd wired into Nexera's core. Inside, his chest tightened, a storm of betrayal and disbelief churning beneath his calm exterior. 18 years, countless nights spent debugging code, crafting redundancies, shielding the company from chaos, erased in a 10-minute meeting. Simon's words echoed, 3 junior engineers, as if his life's work could be quantified, replaced by kids fresh out of college who'd never seen a server fail at 3 a.m. He paused at his office door, remembering Edward Caldwell's grin when their first system went live. "You've got magic, Ethan," Edward had said, handing him a beer to celebrate. That was 2007, a lifetime ago. Edward had believed in building things right, not cheap. Now, his son Ryan sat on the board, silent as Ethan was discarded. The memory stung, sharper than Simon's smirk. Ethan pushed the door open and began packing his desk, his hands moving on autopilot. A framed photo of him and Edward, toasting in the old server room, went into a cardboard box. A 2010 Employee of the Year badge followed, its edges worn from years of quiet pride. Each item was a shard of a life he'd thought unbreakable. The open-plan office outside grew hushed. Colleagues glanced over, then away, their eyes heavy with pity or fear that they'd be next. Ethan felt their stares like pinpricks. His phone buzzed. A text from Mark Jensen, the database admin he'd mentored for a decade. "This is bullshit, Ethan. The team's freaking out." Ethan's thumb hovered over the reply button, but he pocketed the phone. Words wouldn't change this. He sealed the box, his jaw tight, and walked out, carrying 18 years in his hands, leaving behind a company that no longer knew what it had lost. Ethan's truck rumbled into the driveway of his lakeside cabin, the crunch of gravel under tires a stark contrast to the silence in his chest. The cedar-shingled house stood quiet, its porch overlooking Lake Ontario, where the water shimmered under a fading copper sky. He stepped out, the cardboard box from his office heavy in his arms, and settled into a weathered Adirondack chair on the porch. A bottle of bourbon sat on the side table, a gift from Clara for their last anniversary. He poured a finger, the amber liquid catching the last light of day, and let the burn anchor him to the moment. Clara appeared at the screen door, her paint-splattered apron a familiar sight. "You're home early," she said, her voice soft but searching. She stepped closer, her eyes tracing the box, then his face. "Ethan, what happened?" He took a slow sip, staring at the lake. "They let me go. Cost-cutting." The words felt hollow, inadequate for the weight of 18 years. Clara's hand found his shoulder, warm and steady. "Those idiots," she whispered, anger lacing her tone. "What now?" Ethan shrugged, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Something'll turn up. But his mind was elsewhere, on the labyrinth of code he'd woven into Nexra's systems. Hidden security layers, intricate redundancies, all undocumented because the company had refused to fund a proper team. Only he knew how to navigate it, how to keep it from unraveling. Simon's team would flounder, and part of Ethan knew they deserved it. Not out of spite, but justice. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was done. There was a difference. Clara sat beside him, silent, her presence a quiet bulwark against the storm he wouldn't name. As the lake darkened, Ethan felt a clarity settle in. Nexra would learn what they'd thrown away, not because he'd sabotaged them, but because they'd sabotaged themselves. 2 weeks after his termination, Ethan Cole sat at his kitchen table, the lake outside his window a restless gray under a late October sky. His phone buzzed relentlessly, Simon Blake's name flashing on the screen. Ethan let it go to voicemail, the 5th call that day. "Ethan, it's Simon." The message began, his voice tight with panic. "The tenant portal's been down for hours. The new team can't figure out your code. Can you call me? Please." Ethan deleted it, his jaw set, but the next message came an hour later, more desperate. "Payments aren't processing. We're getting complaints from thousands of residents. Just a quick consult, Ethan." He ignored that too, but the calls kept coming, each one a crack in Nexra's facade. Late that evening, a text from Mark Jensen, his old database admin, lit up his phone. "Check your email. Found something you need to see." Ethan's pulse quickened. He opened his laptop, the glow casting shadows across his face, and found Mark's message waiting. A zip file labeled Nexra Archives. Inside were emails, dozens of them, between Simon and the board. Ethan's breath caught as he read the first one, dated 6 months ago. "Cole's salary is unsustainable," Simon wrote. "We can hire younger engineers and save $1 million annually. It's time to modernize." Another email laid out the bigger picture. The private equity firm owning Nexra was prepping to sell, and cutting costs was key to inflating the company's value. Ethan's hands trembled, not from anger but from the cold sting of betrayal. He'd trusted Nexra, poured 18 years into their systems, only to be a pawn in their game. He saved every email, his mind racing. This wasn't just Simon's doing. There was more to uncover. He typed a reply to Mark. Keep digging. Then he leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the truth settling like dust. They'd planned this for months, and he'd never seen it coming. But now he'd make sure they couldn't hide. Mark's next email arrived 2 days later, a bombshell that hit harder than the first. Ethan was in his home office, a cluttered space with Clara's sketches pinned to the walls, when he opened it. The subject line read, "You won't believe this." Attached was another batch of emails, and one name stood out. Ryan Caldwell, Edward's son and a board member. Ethan's stomach twisted. Ryan, who'd once called him Dad's favorite, had been Simon's biggest ally. An email from Ryan to Simon, sent 3 months before Ethan's firing, was blunt. "Coal systems are a liability. We need to streamline before the sale. I'm counting on you." Another revealed Ryan's motive. A failed real estate venture had left him drowning in personal debt, and selling Nexera was his way out. Ethan closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Ryan at Edward's retirement party, toasting Ethan's genius as they laughed over whiskey. Edward had trusted Ethan to carry his legacy, but Ryan had sold it for a quick buck. The betrayal cut deeper than Simon's ambition, a knife twisted by familiarity. Ethan thought of Edward's words, "Build something solid." Had Ryan forgotten, or had he never cared? Mark's note was brief. "There's more where this came from." Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about a company that had lost its soul. He saved the emails, his mind mapping the web of deceit. Simon was a puppet. Ryan was pulling strings. But who else was involved? Ethan knew he was only scratching the surface, and the deeper he dug, the uglier it would get. The third revelation came a week later, and it was personal. Ethan was sorting through Mark's latest data drop, system logs showing how Nexera's new engineers had botched critical maintenance steps, when he found an email from Tom Reed, a young engineer he'd mentored. Tom's name hit like a slap. Ethan had spent years teaching him, from debugging basics to network security, even covering his lunch when Tom was a broke intern. Now, Tom was Simon's team lead, and his email to Simon was damning. "Coal systems are outdated. We can replace them with off-the-shelf solutions in 6 months." The lie stung. Ethan's systems were custom, built for Nexera's unique needs, and Tom knew it. Flashbacks hit hard. Tom's shy grin when Ethan praised his first project, the late-night pizza runs during crunch times. Ethan had saved Tom's job once, vouching for him after a costly mistake. And this was his repayment. The system logs told another story. Tom's team had ignored Ethan's security protocols, triggering the errors now crippling Nexera. Mark's text followed. "They're screwed because of this." Ethan leaned back, his throat tight. He thought of his father, Jack, and the promise to build something lasting. Tom's betrayal wasn't just professional. It was a betrayal of that promise, of the trust Ethan had poured into him. He added Tom's email to his growing file, each piece of evidence a brick in the wall he was building. Alone in his office, with Clara's paintings watching, Ethan felt the isolation of a man who'd given too much to those who gave nothing back. By the end of the month, Ethan had pieced together the full scope of Nexera's deception. He sat at his kitchen table, papers and notes spread out, a cup of coffee gone cold. The emails, logs, and Mark's quiet leaks painted a grim picture. Simon's cost-cutting was a facade for Ryan's desperate bid to sell Nexera and clear his debts. Tom's lies had greased the wheels, and the board had nodded along, blinded by dollar signs. Clara noticed the change in Ethan, the way his eyes hardened when he worked late. "You're not letting this go, are you?" she asked, her voice a mix of worry and pride. "They don't get to erase me," Ethan replied, his tone steady. He wasn't driven by revenge, but by a need to reclaim his worth. He started a list. Nexera's system weaknesses, potential allies like Mark, and legal options with his lawyer, Karen Walsh. Clara's words echoed his father's. Build something they can't tear down. Ethan's plan was taking shape, not to destroy Nexera, but to expose its rot. Mark's final message that night hinted at more. Monroe Holdings is talking about pulling out. Ethan's lips twitched. Not a smile, but a spark of possibility. Nexera was crumbling, and he held the map to its ruin. Whatever came next, he'd face it on his terms, armed with the truth they'd tried to bury. Ethan Cole sat across from Karen Walsh in her Rochester law office, the air thick with the scent of leather and coffee. Karen, a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for dismantling corporate overreach, flipped through the stack of emails Mark had sent, her pen tapping rhythmically. "Nexera's got nothing on you," she said, her voice firm. "Your contract doesn't require post-termination support, and these emails show they planned your exit months ago. They're bluffing if they threaten to sue." Ethan nodded, his hands clasped tightly. The emails were his shield, proof of Nexera's betrayal, but he needed more than defense. He needed a strategy. Karen leaned forward. "What do you want, Ethan? Justice? Revenge?" He paused, the question echoing his father's words about building something lasting. "I want them to see what they lost," he said quietly. That afternoon, his phone rang again, not Simon, but Nathan Harper, the tech director at Orion Technologies, a rising competitor. "I've heard about your work at Nexera," Nathan said. "We need a system like that. Join us." Ethan agreed, but with a condition: every line of code gets documented. No single points of failure. Nathan didn't hesitate. Done. Back home, Ethan began mapping his counterstrike. He'd collect every scrap of evidence, emails, logs, anything Mark could pull from Nexera's servers. He'd protect his reputation, not just for himself but for Clara, who'd stood by him through every late night. He opened a notebook, listing names: Mark, Karen, Nathan, allies. Then he wrote Nexera's weaknesses: undocumented systems, inexperienced engineers, a board chasing short-term profits. The plan was taking shape, not to destroy but to expose. As Clara's paintings glowed softly on the walls, Ethan felt a spark of purpose. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting for the truth. At Orion Technologies, Ethan threw himself into building a new property management system, his days filled with flowcharts and code, his nights with Nexera's unraveling. Mark kept him updated, slipping reports through encrypted channels. One showed Nexera's losses: millions in revenue from system outages, tenants threatening to sue, and maintenance backlogs piling up. "They're bleeding," Mark texted. Ethan didn't smile, but he felt the scales tipping. He saw an opportunity to turn up the heat. Through a secure email, he contacted a tech journalist, Sarah Klein, known for exposing corporate missteps. Posing as an anonymous whistleblower, he sent her a summary of Nexera's failures: crashed portals, botched payments, and a leadership team out of its depth. He included no proprietary data, just enough to spark curiosity. Sarah's article hit online a week later, headlined "Nexera Properties Tech Meltdown: a cost-cutting catastrophe." It quoted insiders and hinted at mismanagement. The fallout was immediate. Monroe Holdings, Nexera's biggest client, issued a statement expressing concern about service reliability. Ethan read the news at his Orion desk, the hum of new servers a stark contrast to Nexera's chaos. He wasn't done. Mark sent another file: internal memos admitting the junior engineers were overwhelmed. Ethan saved it, his plan growing sharper. He'd let Nexera's own mistakes bury them, but he needed to stay one step ahead. Clara noticed his focus, her eyes searching his over dinner. "You're building something again, aren't you?" she asked. Ethan nodded. Not just a system this time. The plan hit a snag when Nexera's legal team struck. A certified letter arrived at Ethan's cabin, accusing him of breaching fiduciary duty by designing inaccessible systems and failing to transfer knowledge. The lawsuit demanded damages and threatened to freeze his assets. Ethan's stomach churned as he handed the letter to Karen. "They're desperate," she said, scanning the pages. "This is a scare tactic, but it could drag on, cost you thousands." Ethan felt the weight of it, his savings, his new start at Orion, all at risk. But backing down meant letting Nexera rewrite his story. "We fight," he told Karen. "File a countersuit. Wrongful termination, defamation, whatever sticks." Karen grinned. "That's the spirit." Ethan gave her everything: emails showing his repeated requests for a documentation team, logs proving the new engineer's errors. Mark sent more ammo, system reports detailing how Simon's team had ignored critical protocols, causing the outages. Ethan's countersuit argued Nexra's mismanagement, not his systems, was to blame. The legal battle loomed, a dark cloud over his careful plans. Late at night, he sat on the porch, the lake a black mirror reflecting his doubts. Had he pushed too far? Clara joined him, her hand finding his. "You're not alone in this," she said. Ethan squeezed her hand, his resolve steadying. The lawsuit was Nexra's last card, and he'd play his better. He thought of his father's words, the promise to build something unbreakable. This fight wasn't just for him. It was for every engineer dismissed as too expensive. A twist came from an unexpected source. Laura Bennett, the HR rep who'd sat silently during Ethan's termination, called him out of the blue. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't speak up when they fired you. I should have." Ethan listened, wary, as Laura revealed she'd kept a recording of a board meeting where Simon and Ryan discussed streamlining by cutting Ethan to polish the books for Nexra's sale. "I'll testify if you need me," she said. Ethan's breath caught. Laura, the quiet bystander, was now his ace. He sent the recording to Karen, who called it a game changer. Meanwhile, Ethan asked Mark to set a legal trap, a system log that automatically flagged maintenance errors by Simon's team, admissible in court as evidence of negligence. Mark delivered, his texts brimming with defiance. Their toast. Ethan's plan grew bolder. He met with Nathan at Orion, outlining a scenario where Orion could acquire Nexra if it collapsed, positioning their new system to take over Monroe Holdings' portfolio. Clara saw the fire in him, the man who'd built Nexra from nothing now building his comeback. "You're not just fighting them," she said one night, her eyes shining. "You're showing them who you are." Ethan nodded, the weight of her words grounding him. The recording, the logs, the article, they were pieces of a puzzle only he could assemble, a blueprint for justice. Ethan's plan crystallized in the quiet hours before dawn, his laptop casting a blue glow across the cabin's living room. He worked with surgical precision, coordinating with Karen to strengthen the countersuit, ensuring Laura's recording was legally vetted, and briefing Nathan on Orion's potential acquisition. Sarah Klein's articles kept the pressure on, a second piece detailing Nexra's leadership crisis and quoting furious tenants. Monroe Holdings stock dipped, their CEO publicly questioning Nexra's reliability. Ethan didn't gloat, he wasn't wired for it. His goal wasn't to torch Nexra, but to let their own hubris consume them. He reviewed his list. Evidence locked, allies in place, legal defenses ready. The lawsuit still loomed, but Karen was confident. "They're bleeding cash," she said. "They can't afford a long fight." Ethan's work at Orion was his anchor, the new system a testament to everything Nexra had rejected, documented, scalable, built to last. He thought of Tom Reed, the kid he'd mentored, now complicit in Simon's scheme. It hurt, but Ethan let it fuel him, not blind him. One night, as Clara slept, he stood on the porch, the lake whispering under a starless sky. His father's voice echoed, "Make something they can't tear down." This was it, not just a system, but a legacy of truth. Ethan was ready for the showdown, his plan a silent, lethal machine, waiting to spring. Nexra had underestimated him, and soon, they'd know the cost. The axe fell on a crisp November morning when Monroe Holdings, Nexra's largest client, announced it was terminating its contract. The press release was brutal, citing persistent system failures and a new partnership with Orion Technologies. Ethan Cole sat in a Rochester coffee shop, across from Charles Monroe himself, the CEO whose portfolio spanned 10,000 units. "I've heard about you," Charles said, his handshake firm. "Nexra's loss is our gain. Your system at Orion, it's rock solid." Ethan nodded, a flicker of pride breaking through his stoic facade. He'd built Orion's platform from the ground up, every module documented, every redundancy tested. It was everything Nexra had refused to let him perfect. Back at his cabin, Ethan opened his laptop to find Sarah Klein's third article blazing across the internet, "Nexra's Collapse, a tale of greed and incompetence." It detailed tenant lawsuits, plummeting revenue, and whispers of a boardroom coup. Sarah had dug deeper, citing sources who pointed to Simon Blake's disastrous cost-cutting and Ryan Caldwell's reckless push to sell. Social media erupted, Nexra's stock tanked, and panicked investors flooded the board with demands. Ethan sipped his coffee, the lake outside glinting under a rare sun. He hadn't written the article, but he'd fed Sarah the kindling. Monroe's defection was the spark, and now Nexra was burning. Charles had hinted at more. Other clients were eyeing Orion, drawn by Ethan's reputation. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the weight of his work, not as a burden but as power. Nexra's collapse wasn't his doing. It was their own. But he held the match and the world was watching. Inside Nexra's headquarters, chaos reigned. The tenant portal was offline for the third week. Payment systems were a tangle of errors, and maintenance requests piled up like leaves in a storm. The board convened an emergency meeting, their faces grim on a grainy video call Ethan heard about from Mark Jensen. Simon Blake, once the golden boy with his Cornell MBA, was stripped of his title, his cost-cutting vision now a noose. Ryan Caldwell, desperate to salvage his reputation, made a last-ditch call to Ethan's cell. "We were wrong," Ryan pleaded, his voice cracking. "Come back, Ethan. Double your salary, a signing bonus, name your price." Ethan stood on his porch, the lake a dark expanse before him, and let the words hang. He thought of Edward Caldwell, Ryan's father, who'd trusted him to build something lasting. Ryan had betrayed that legacy for a quick payout. "You made your choice," Ethan said, his tone even almost gentle. "You thought I was expendable. Now you're seeing the cost." He hung up, the silence that followed heavier than any argument. Mark texted later, "They're imploding. Half the IT team quit." Ethan didn't reply. He wasn't gloating, he didn't need to. Nexra's wounds were self-inflicted, each error a consequence of their hubris. Simon's firing was just the start. The board was next, and Ryan's debts loomed like a shadow. Ethan turned back to his cabin, Clara's silhouette in the window a reminder of what he was fighting for. He'd given Nexra his best, and they'd thrown it away. Now they'd face the reckoning. The courtroom was a sterile box, its oak benches worn smooth by years of disputes. Ethan sat beside Karen Walsh, his hands steady despite the knot in his gut. Nexra's lawsuit, accusing him of designing inaccessible systems, was their final gambit, a desperate bid to pin their failures on him. Karen stood, her voice cutting through the room as she presented Laura Bennett's recording. Simon's voice crackled from the speakers, admitting the plan to streamline Ethan for Nexra's sale. Ryan's agreement followed, his words cold. "Coal's a cost we can't afford." The judge's face hardened. Karen then submitted Mark's system logs, irrefutable proof that Simon's team had ignored critical protocols, causing the outages. Nexra's lawyer stammered, his arguments crumbling. The judge dismissed their case, then ruled in Ethan's favor on the countersuit, awarding damages for wrongful termination. Outside, reporters swarmed, Sarah Klein among them, her latest piece already trending, "Nexra's legal defeat, a veteran engineer's victory." The headlines shredded what was left of Nexra's reputation. Tenants shared horror stories online, investors pulled funding, and smaller clients followed Monroe's lead, jumping to Orion. Ethan walked past the cameras, his expression unreadable, Clara at his side. "You did it," she whispered, squeezing his hand. He shook his head. "They did it to themselves." The victory wasn't sweet, it was necessary. Nexra had tried to erase him, to rewrite his legacy as a liability. But the truth, laid bare in court, was a blade sharper than any lie. Ethan had fought not for vengeance, but for the right to be seen. The end came swiftly. Orion Technologies offered to buy Nexra for a fraction of its former value, a quarter of what the private equity firm had hoped to fetch. With no clients, no cash, and a board in disarray, Nexra's directors had no choice. They signed the papers in a hushed boardroom, Ryan Caldwell's signature shaky, his face ashen. Ethan was named Orion's director of integration, tasked with merging Nexra's remnants into Orion's systems. He walked into Nexra's old headquarters, now rebranded as Orion Integrated Property Management, and faced a room of former colleagues. Some avoided his gaze, others nodded with quiet respect. "We're building something new," Ethan told them, his voice steady, resonant. "Every process will be documented, every team trained. No one gets left behind." His words were a promise, not just to them but to himself, a vow to honor the work Nexera had discarded. He spent weeks dismantling his old systems, replacing them with Orion's platform, clean, scalable, unbreakable. The transition was smooth, a testament to the care he'd poured into every detail. Monroe Holdings properties came online without a hitch, their CEO Charles Monroe sending a personal note, "You've restored our faith." Ethan tucked it away, not needing praise but valuing it. He stood in the server room one evening, the hum of new hardware a quiet triumph. Nexera's failure was complete, not because he'd torn it down, but because he'd built something better. He'd kept his father's promise, not with anger, but with precision. The final confrontation was inevitable. Simon Blake and Ryan Caldwell requested a meeting, their faces drawn as they sat across from Ethan in a sterile Orion conference room. Simon's glasses were gone, his arrogance replaced by a brittle edge. "You planned this," he spat. "You rigged the systems to fail." Ethan leaned back, his eyes cold. "I built those systems to last. You chose to break them." He slid a folder across the table, copies of his documentation proposals, rejected by Nexera for years. "Every crash was on you." Ryan tried a softer tack, his voice low.
"Ethan, I'm sorry."
"I was in over my head." Ethan met his gaze, seeing Edward's shadow in Ryan's features. "You sold your father's legacy," he said quietly. "That's not on me." He stood, leaving them with their regrets. Outside, Clara waited, her smile a beacon. The integration was nearly done, Orion now the Northeast's largest property manager. Ethan addressed the staff one last time, his words simple. "We build for the long haul, together." As he stepped away, the room's applause was soft but real. He hadn't sought revenge. Revenge was petty. He'd sought justice, and in the hum of new servers, the trust of his team, he found it. The lake glittered outside, a mirror of the clarity he'd earned. A year after Nexera's fall, Ethan Cole stood in a sunlit Orion conference room, addressing a group of young engineers. His salt and pepper hair caught the morning light as he explained the principles of resilient systems, his voice steady, almost reverent. The Technical Education Division, his brainchild, was now a reality, a program he'd convinced Nathan Harper to fund. Ethan taught not just code but philosophy. Build for the long haul, document every step, value the people behind the machines. The engineers listened, pens scratching, their eyes bright with the hunger Ethan remembered from his own youth. Outside, Rochester hummed with spring, the lake beyond the city a shimmering promise of renewal. Ethan and Clara had moved to a smaller cabin, closer to the water, its walls alive with her paintings, vibrant canvases of waves and skies. Clara had opened a tiny gallery in town, her art finding buyers among locals drawn to her quiet passion. Their evenings were simple, dinners by candlelight, walks along the shore, her hand in his as they watched the stars emerge. The frenetic pace of Nexera's world felt like a distant dream, replaced by a peace Ethan hadn't known he'd craved. He still worked hard, but now it was for something larger, a legacy, not just a paycheck. At night, he'd sit on their new porch, the lake's gentle lapping a reminder of his father's words. Make something that lasts. The division was his answer, a way to ensure his knowledge wouldn't die with him. Each lesson he taught, each engineer he mentored, was a brick in that enduring foundation. Clara saw it too, her smile soft as she watched him prepare his slides. "You're finally home," she said one evening, and Ethan knew she didn't mean the cabin. He was building again, not just systems, but a life rooted in purpose. One afternoon, as Ethan reviewed curricula in his office, an email from Ryan Caldwell arrived, its subject line simple. "I'm sorry." He hesitated, then opened it. Ryan's words were raw, stripped of the boardroom polish. "My father was proud of you, Ethan," he wrote. "He'd be ashamed of me." I let debt and pressure cloud my judgment. I should have fought for you. Ryan mentioned Edward's retirement in Florida, how he still spoke of Ethan's systems as the heart of the old Caldwell estates. The apology wasn't groveling, it was honest, a man reckoning with his failures. Ethan read it twice, then archived it, not because he forgave Ryan but because he didn't need the weight of resentment. Later that day, Mark Jensen stopped by, now a team lead at Orion, and handed Ethan a folded letter. "One of your students wrote this," Mark said, grinning. The letter was from a young engineer, Emily, who joined Ethan's program. "Thank you, Mr. Cole, for teaching me that quality matters more than speed," she wrote. "Your systems inspire me to build things that last." Ethan's throat tightened. He placed the letter beside the faded photo of him and his father, Jack, their grins frozen in a moment of shared triumph. The promise he'd made Jack to create something enduring was complete, not in the servers he'd built, but in the minds he was shaping. Clara found him there, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. Ethan nodded, the weight of 18 years lifting, replaced by a quiet pride that needed no applause. Ethan walked along the shore of Lake Ontario one crisp morning, the leaves ablaze in reds and golds, the water a mirror for the sky's fleeting hues. The past year played like a film in his mind. The sting of Nexera's betrayal, the courtroom's cold justice, the hum of Orion's servers rising from the ashes of his old work. He hadn't sought revenge. Revenge was a fire that burned out fast. Instead, he'd let his work speak, proving his worth in the systems he built and the lessons he taught. Orion was now the Northeast's largest property manager, its success a testament to Ethan's vision. No shortcuts, no single points of failure, no one discarded for cost. He thought of Simon Blake, broken by his own ambition, and Ryan Caldwell, humbled by his mistakes. Their downfall wasn't his victory, it was their consequence. Ethan's victory was here, in the lake's calm, in Clara's laughter, in the engineers who'd carry his principles forward. He paused, picking up a smooth stone and skipping it across the water, each ripple a reminder of what he'd built. The world would forget Nexera's collapse, but it would remember the systems that worked, the people who thrived because someone cared enough to do things right. Ethan turned back toward home, Clara waiting, the future open. When you're undervalued, the truest response isn't destruction. It's creation, a legacy that speaks louder than any betrayal.